And thanks to at home for joining us this hour. This is one of those days in which there is simultaneously a lot going on in the news about politics, but there's also a lot going on in the news about just news. Now, we have not covered the twists and turns of the Trayvon Martin shooting case in Sanford, Florida, as closely as have many of the other shows on this network. But today is the day when, whether or not you have been following this story closely, today is the day that this story became, without a doubt, inarguably, the most important thing you need to be up on in order to understand what's going on in our country right now. Today is the day when the central fact of this story, the fact that made it a cause of national outrage, changed. A young unarmed man, a teenager, being shot and killed will always be the cause of grief and of outrage. But what has made the Trayvon Martin case a cause for national outrage is that the shooting and killing of an unarmed teenager was not being treated by local authorities as a crime. A teenager was killed. There was an admitted and identified shooter, but the shooter was let go, and the shooting was not being treated as a crime. That has been the central fact making this one crime in Florida, this one apparent crime, this one shooting in Florida, a national cause. And that central fact at the center of that case changed today. And it never would have changed if it were not for the outrage, the attention, the protest, the emotion that has surrounded this case. And so whether or not, again, you have been paying attention to this story every day, today is the day to really understand it. On Sunday, February 26th, a neighborhood watch volunteer in Sanford, Florida, a man named George Zimmerman, called local police. He said there had been recent break-ins in the area. He asked police to respond to a person he had seen in his neighborhood who he said was a suspicious-looking person. He described this suspicious person as a black male, probably in his late teens, wearing a dark hoodie. And the man who the 911 caller was so suspicious of was, in fact, a young black man. He was a very young man. He was 17 years old. He was not armed, and it turned out he had every reason to be exactly where he was. His father's girlfriend had a home in that gated community, and young Trayvon Martin was walking back to that home from a convenience store with a bag of candy and an iced tea and nothing else suspicious on his person. What happened next is key. What is not in dispute is that George Zimmerman, that neighborhood watch volunteer, shot and killed Trayvon Martin shortly after his phone call to 911. Mr. Zimmerman told police that after confronting the teenager, he had turned around and was walking back to his vehicle when Trayvon Martin, he says, approached him from behind. Mr. Zimmerman told police the two of them exchanged words and that Trayvon Martin punched him to the ground and started beating him up. Mr. Zimmerman told police that he then shot Trayvon Martin in self-defense. Again, that is George Zimmerman's account of what happened. Obviously, there is no account from Trayvon Martin because he did not survive this confrontation. The Sanford, Florida police did respond to the scene. They did not arrest George Zimmerman, but they did take him to the police station where they interviewed him before releasing him. The police investigated the case. Mr. Zimmerman admitted to the shooting. Sanford police elected not to formally arrest and pursue charges against him. They elected to treat this shooting as not a crime. The Sanford police chief said publicly that there was no probable cause to arrest Mr. Zimmerman. Quote, Zimmerman provided a statement claiming he acted in self-defense, which at the time was supported by physical evidence and testimony. By Florida statute, law enforcement was prohibited from making an arrest based on the facts and circumstances they had at the time. That was the statement from the police chief, specifically citing the statute number for Florida's so-called Stand Your Ground gun law. The Stand Your Ground law, which was passed in Florida in 2005, allows people who feel threatened to use deadly force, even if they don't first try to retreat from a confrontation. So if you feel scared and you have a choice of running away or of killing the person you are scared of, go ahead and kill him. George Zimmerman told police that he felt threatened, that he was acting in self-defense when he shot Trayvon Martin. And that is the key point that explains why this is a national story, why it is such a flashpoint, why it has been upsetting to so many people. Not just that this shooting happened, but that this shooting happened and the person who admits to having been the shooter in this case went free. The fact that this shooting was not treated as a crime in the state of Florida. That is the aspect of this case that galvanized the protests, which started locally but that quickly went national. Why did George Zimmerman say he felt threatened by a kid he followed who was just walking down the street minding his own business? In not charging George Zimmerman, were the local police complicit in the idea that a young African-American man walking down the street is an implicitly threatening thing? Were they implicitly condoning the idea that violence against any young black man is therefore always understandable? It's always excusable. As the protests swelled, the police chief of Sanford, Florida, announced that he was temporarily stepping down from his post. Also, the prosecutor who handles cases in Sanford recused himself from the case. He had decided that a grand jury should look into whether or not there should be charges in this case, but he recused himself before that could happen. After that recusal, a special prosecutor was appointed to look into the case because the first prosecutor was recused. This special prosecutor announced earlier this week that she'd decided she would not put the question of whether or not there should be charges in this case to a grand jury. She would not be having a grand jury decide that. Instead, she would decide it herself. And today, this case blew wide open when we got her decision.
Today, we filed an information charging George Zimmerman with murder in the second degree. I will confirm that Mr. Zimmerman is indeed in custody.
Can you tell us where? Can you tell us
I will not tell you where. That's for his safety as well as everyone else's safety. He will be taken when it's appropriate for the appropriate appearance in front of a judge.
That was Florida State's Attorney Angela Corey announcing today that she has filed second-degree murder charges against George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin shooting. This is the first time that charges have been brought in this case, or that anybody has been taken into custody in this case. This is the point that all of the protests were leading up to. As the special prosecutor in the case, Ms. Corey's investigation could have resulted in anything from no charges at all to misdemeanor or felony battery to second-degree murder. She could not have brought first-degree murder charges in this case without a grand jury. Ms. Corey said today that she had, in fact, tried to prepare Trayvon Martin's parents for the possibility that she would not be able to bring any charges in the case.
We did not promise them anything. In fact, we specifically talked about if criminal charges do not come out of this, what can we help you do to make sure your son's death is not in vain?
In announcing second-degree murder charges against George Zimmerman today, Ms. Corey was also specifically asked by reporters about how the state's stand your ground law might affect the prosecution in this case.
If stand your ground becomes an issue, we fight it if we believe it's the right thing to do. So if it becomes an issue in this case, we will fight that affirmative defense. My prosecutors, and a lot of them are here, and I'm so proud of them, they have worked tirelessly running this office while we've been working on this case. They fight these stand your ground motions. Mr. Moody just finished a 4-day full stand your ground motion on another case. We fight hard. Some of them we've won, and we've had to appeal them, or the defense has appealed, and we've won it on appeal. Some we fought hard, and the judge ruled against us. That's happening to prosecutors all over the state. It is the law of the state of Florida, and it will be applied.
So on the day that this case of such grave national concern blew wide open, questions remain, including about what happens next in this case, and about whether Florida's stand your ground law will keep implicitly circumscribing the range of justice available to those seeking justice in the case, and whether or not the stand your ground law will change, or the politics of those types of laws will change because of all the national attention and upset on this case. Joining us now is NBC News national investigative correspondent Michael Isikoff. Michael, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your time tonight.
Good to be with you, Rachel.
Michael, what happens next in this case, just in terms of the expected procedures? We know that George Zimmerman is already in custody. What is the next step for him?
There'll be an initial court appearance tomorrow where he will be advised of his rights and advised of the charges against him. His lawyer will almost certainly seek bond or a bond hearing. But what's interesting about what happened today, the charges, the second-degree murder charge, that's not a bondable offense in Seminole County. He would not normally have an opportunity to post bond tomorrow. His lawyer will have to seek a bond hearing, and my understanding is then he'll have 21 days, the prosecutors will have 21 days to have that bond hearing, and that would be the first time that we might get any further information about the nature of the evidence. It may not be much because the issues there are risk of flight, great danger to the community. But right now, we got very little, we got no information about what underlay, what the evidence is in this case, what led Angela Corey to choose second-degree murder, and that'll be the first opportunity. The bond hearing may be the first opportunity where the prosecutors will have to speak and tell us a bit more than they told us today.
So legally, in terms of understanding what changed between the initial decision not to bring charges in this case and the decision today, we still don't have any further detail about a different interpretation of the stand your ground idea, whether or not there is further evidence that has come to light that would affect even the same legal analysis that determined there shouldn't be charges in this case in the first place. You're saying that we sort of have to wait until tomorrow to see if this was just a different type of prosecutorial discretion or whether something new has come to light?
Exactly, and I'm not sure we're going to learn anything much more tomorrow. I mean, I got to tell you, Rachel, that a lot of lawyers who are following this case, who I've talked to today, were surprised by this decision. I think most people expected that there would be charges brought against George Zimmerman, but I don't think many expected it was going to be second-degree murder. And you're right. What changed from the state of the evidence, which was pretty murky as it was initially laid out in that police report, and today we don't know. We know Zimmerman claimed self-defense. We know the initial police report did say he had a bloody nose and blood on the back of his head. We don't know of any clear eyewitnesses who saw in real time what happened. It was dark. It was a rainy night. Yet clearly, Angela Corey found evidence to contradict the initial decision. What that was, we don't know.
Michael, one last question for you. We learned today that with Florida's open government laws, there's a real possibility that the trial here, the ultimate trial, could be televised. Do we know further about whether or not there is any discretion about that? Obviously, that would have big implications in terms of the continued political and real emotional attention to this case nationwide.
Well, Florida trials do tend to get televised. Remember Casey Anthony. But I think the amount of tension on this case is enormous. It's got great political implications, stand your ground laws around the country. I think the decision today, just as the initial decision not to charge George Zimmerman inflamed a lot of people, got a lot of people angry, I think this decision of second-degree murder is going to inflame a lot of people on the other side. We have the National Rifle Association, which gave us Stand Your Ground, having its national convention in St. Louis this week. Mitt Romney is scheduled to speak on Friday. I think the combination here is only going to escalate and make this a much bigger political issue than any of us expected a couple of weeks ago.
I think you're right. You think we've been transfixed by it thus far. I think that is set to increase now. Michael Isikoff, NBC News national investigative correspondent. Michael, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Supposedly, there are about 2,000 members of the Communist Party USA. Turns out that a huge proportion of that membership is made up of members of Congress. It's true. I heard that somewhere. That's next.